Yeah, I'm just going to do this the share screen, so hopefully it will work out okay. I am not the world's greatest with technology, so please forgive me. What was really interesting is talking to or listening to Evie's, I could just see so many connections between what I'm going to talk about and what was just, and I think that big thing, that need for connection, that need for agency.
Actually, it was interesting.
Sorry?
I'm amazed at how people...
Oh, hang on, I'm going to...
You know, I had my half an hour yesterday. I tried to fit in 2 exercises. I felt really rushed.
Sarah, you're on.
Evie was talking at
Sarah, you're on. There you go.
I'm just going to put these on. I was hoping I could avoid doing it, but hopefully it should be okay. Can you hear me? Okay, so, and this other idea that someone mentioned about well-being and mental health being on that continuum, so you have that matrix, I can just see so many parallels between what I do. So I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and have been working for about 20 years as a clinical psychologist. So very much in that, I guess Seligman, when he talked about, you know, psychology focusing on what is wrong with you, as opposed to positive psychology, what is right with you. So in 2016, I did a master's in positive psychology and found that it fitted really well with clinical work. And I think what it made me think about is one of the things Carl Rogers said many, many years ago, is that therapeutic approaches go to get people from, you know, not feeling great to feeling okay, but why don't we looking at getting people from feeling okay to feeling awesome? So that kind of step up. So that's kind of, so what I did is with my private work, I work privately and within a charity sector. I really wanted to see how I could combine some positive psychology interventions. So obviously with alcohol, we need to be very mindful of alcohol withdrawal. So there is that medical sense that when people have been using alcohol for long periods of time, we can't just stop, we have to be mindful of that. One of the things, I'm just going to move this so I can see my screen, is to be aware of the triggers. So what we have in addiction services, the HALT SPADs. So that's being aware that when people are hungry, when they are angry, when they are lonely, when they are tired, they're more likely to feel the urge to use a substance or alcohol. When they're bored, when they're anxious, depressed or stressed. So again, in the previous talk, this idea about boredom, we know that not only does that kind of impact your mental well-being, impact your happiness, but also it makes you more likely to use substances. And then the next thing I looked at, which is a more traditional clinical approach, is the schema. So schema therapy identifies the core schema that we have about ourselves and how those influence our well-being. So a common schema might be, say, mistrust. So we might have a mistrust schema that basically we can't trust other people because other people let us down. And the way we deal with that is we can either overcompensate, so we can kind of be super full on and super helpful so that people don't let us down or abandon us, or we can avoid that, so never put ourselves in a situation where people might let us down, or we can surrender to it, which kind of means we just kind of give in, accept it as an inevitable fate. Now, of course, if you imagine that you've got this belief about yourself, a belief about other people, belief about the world, and that if you just give into it or you overcompensate or you avoid it, you're not living a life to your full potential. You're not being your best possible self. So that's kind of I was going to say, it's a well evidence-based approach for working with substance misuse schema therapy. The next thing we did is emotional coping skills. So what we wanted to do is say, well, actually, I think a lot of alcohol and a lot of addiction is about emotional avoidance. So we wanted to look at ways in which we can express an emotion in a safe way, in a warranted way, in an appropriate way, but in a proportionate way. So it's about being able to express our emotions. Now, what was really important to me is I don't want you just to be able to sit with unpleasant emotions. I also want you to be able to work with pleasant emotions. So about 5 years ago, I was working on an inpatient unit, and we were talking, I was running a group, and I was talking about how do you sit with an emotion and sitting with emotions. And one of the service users said, Pat, how do you sit with an emotion? And I thought, you know what, as a psychologist, I kind of say this a lot to people. I say, look, we need to sit with your emotion. And I've never actually been asked, how do you sit with an emotion? So it was really interesting. So as a group, we worked this out, and I made the acronym swap seats because I liked the idea that you can sit with an emotion, but you can swap your seats from an unpleasant, distressing emotion to sitting with a pleasant emotion. So if the emotion is unpleasant, you can self-soothe. So soothing your body, soothing your mind. And there's lots of techniques we teach people to self-soothe. What's really important is to express your emotion. And that's where the swap skills became really important, to make sure you express it in a safe way, a warranted way, an appropriate way, and a proportionate way. Then the big thing was about how do we accept our emotions? So emotions are human. We wouldn't be human without emotions. And what we don't want to do is push our emotions away. We don't want to avoid, we don't want to surrender to them. And how do we tolerate and surf them? So the analogy I use, it's probably very common, lots of people use it, I think, is to treat an emotion like a wave, that it comes and it goes. And if you imagine yourself at the seaside trying to push a wave back, it's not going to work. But if you imagine yourself surfing that wave, it becomes much easier to manage the waves. So that's the unpleasant emotions. But what I really wanted people to be able to do is build upon the pleasant emotions. And the name has gone, but you know, the broaden and build model, I can't remember who it is now, I'm terribly sorry. But this idea that a pleasant emotion can be savoured, again, be expressed. And I think when we think about great works of art, the most amazing things we do as human beings, that's when we express our emotions. We can appreciate our emotions and be grateful for them. We can show thanks to them and do things to sustain them. So what I wanted is the client to have the skills to deal with both pleasant and unpleasant emotions, no matter what. So they felt that sense of efficacy, which was talked about, agency, which was talked about earlier, this ability that I do have control over how I feel. So, oopsie. How do I, all right, so the next thing we talked about is how we can brim with serenity and improve. So the basic techniques are breathing, relaxation, mental imagery, and mindfulness. And with imagery, we looked at the two types of mental imagery. The first type, to be able to have this safe place, so that you can imagine that if you can imagine yourself in that relaxing forest or by the beach or by the river, you can kind of calm your mind and calm your body in that way. The other method of imagery is how it's used in sports, where I got the person to imagine a success experience and go through it mentally of, this is how I would avoid doing this, this is how I would avoid doing this, this is how I would achieve this. So they mentally rehearsed the positive behavior so that it kind of strengthened. We then talked about mindfulness, and again we looked at the three different types of mindfulness: the bare attention, of being able to notice and let go, but also the wide angle of mindfulness, so that it's a wide angle lens, being able to pull back and look at the big picture, and also the zoom lens of mindful attention, to be able to zoom in and look at the fine detail. So that was how you brim. I'm trying to think of the S might be in the wrong place there. So breathing, relaxation, imagery, mindfulness, and self-soothing. So that's the serenity. S is self-soothing, is serenity, to kind of adopt this more serene, accepting place, to accept, to never give up on yourself, and at times to use distraction. And then the next bit was to improve. So no matter what you're experiencing, you can always invest in yourself. You know, sometimes we win, sometimes we learn. It's okay to be imperfect. In fact, we can be perfectly imperfect, and we can invest in ourselves by taking care of ourselves, by focusing on ourselves. we can find meaning in our experiences, we can follow our passion, we can build our resilience, we can have an open mind and an honest heart, sticking to our values and actively engage and enjoying being you. So these are the skills that we taught: brim with serenity and improve. So the first thing was to notice when the emotions were building up and the urge to use a substance was there, and to be able to step back, brim with serenity. And I guess one of the things I like to think about with people is, instead of mindlessly reacting, how can you mindfully respond? So that's kind of one of the main things to try and do. So then the questions were very much reflection questions. So here's just some examples of, am I who I want to be? What is the one way I can be kinder to myself? When is the last time I pushed my comfort zone? Do I live authentically? And, I find that really interesting, because what does it mean to be authentic? What does it mean to stick to your values? What advice would I give to myself 10 years ago? So if I could go back to my younger self, how can I create more self-confidence in myself? So these are the kinds of questions that try to get people to reflect and think more about who they are. Who am I? So then, kind of going back to the Rogerian sense of this idea that we have an actual self, a real self, and an ideal self, what I wanted to do was try to identify people's strengths, their values, their interests, and their talents, and what are their goals, what are their hopes and their aspirations. And hopefully, if we can combine those two things, we can kind of get that actual self. So one of the things, when there's a sense of congruence, so when your actual self and your real self and your ideal self are lined up, what I think we are is we're in this much better place. There's a sense of wholeness, clarity, identity, certainty. So life has a sense of meaning, purpose, and direction. We're kind of living our life to our full, because we're congruent between who we're capable of being, who we'd like to be, and who we actually are. And I guess the opposite of that is being in this state of incongruence, where there's a mismatch between the actual self, the ideal self, and the real self. And I think it's in that gap that addictions often fit, because people, when you have that sense of incongruence and you're not being authentic and you're not leading the life that you're capable of leading, I think it causes a lot of internal stress. It causes all sorts of difficulties. And I think one way to manage that is to use substances. So one of the things I was very mindful of is the Bruce Alexander studies in the 1970s of Rat Park, where what they did is they found that, when they put rats into these very impoverished environments, they were much likely to choose the cocaine or the heroin in the water as opposed to the normal water. When they put the rats in a social community, when they gave them things that engaged them and stimulated them, their use of the cocaine or heroin distilled water greatly reduced. So what that kind of showed us in addictions is, there's a big thing about social connection, which the previous speaker spoke about, and this sense that, we do need this social community. We do need to have kind of a sense of meaning and purpose. So my thinking was, incongruence creates a sense of emptiness, confusion, uncertainty. Life lacks meaning and purpose. As a result, well-being and happiness becomes quite ethereal, this distant thing, you're never going to get it, and alcohol fills the void. So the idea was, instead of, let's just say, focusing on the don't drink, reduce your drinking, let's say, well, let's do the stuff that focuses on that and names that. But let's see if we can get your strengths and get your talents, we can get your motivation, we get your social connection, to kind of increase that in the hope that you won't need alcohol to kind of fill the void. I hope that makes sense. So the closer we can get the actual, real and ideal, the more congruent somebody feels, the more authentic somebody feels, the more somebody feels in control of their life. And so hopefully the desire to use substances reduces. So if I just try and, So obviously the most obvious thing for us to use, there's lots of CBT techniques as well to find strengths, but what I did want to use is the VIA character strengths one, because I think that's a nice, good list of strengths that we can talk about and then see how we can apply. So the basic plan was to create a vision board, to use mindfulness skills to develop awareness, reflection, and insight. Because remember, what we wanted to do was shift away from this mindless reaction towards a mindful response. We used the skills, so the brim with Serenity improve, and the swap seats to kind of calm the mind, to calm the body, and then work out ways we can increase the helpful and decrease the unhelpful. So the idea was to brim with Serenity, let go of mindless reactions, to identify wise mind, respond mindfully, and improve. And we talked through all of the skills to do that. And then very much it became very self-directed. What I was hoping to do is, I don't know if people would like to talk. So I asked the client if I could use their vision boards. And I was just wondering, I've got a number of the vision boards, but I was just wondering if people would like to just say one thing they notice about this vision board or like about this vision board, just to make it a bit more interactive. Anyone got any observations about this vision board?
I would say it looks playful and light.
Pardon?
It's just playful and light. It doesn't seem like heavy and, you know.
Yeah, which is a big difference to if you think about how normally in a drug and alcohol service or working with people, it might be much more like that. So it's a very light, very playful, and that was definitely one of the person's strengths. So this, I mean, I really liked the positive pan, so I thought that was a really nice one. And you know what we did is we talked about each of the ones. So let's look at the next one. So what about this one? This is well, I won't say anything. What do you think of this one? This one feels, well, so I'm not going to say. What do people think about this one?
It's colorful, it's joyful. It's...
Yeah, so again, joyful. And I'm not sure how many of you have worked in or been in one of these services where people get this black and white handout and there's a list of things and boxes to fill in. It's a very different way of working. It's very creative, it's very passionate, it's very enjoyable. And it gave us great things to talk about. You know, what does respect mean? What does kindness mean? What does companionship mean? What does joy, comfort, and support mean? But in a really, really nice way. So let's look at this one. So what we've got here is another vision board. So what do people think of this one?
It's organized, pretty much. It's very. It's someone who wants to align things correctly. That's what's come up for me.
Yeah. So again, and I think what's really interesting is the use of colours. They're very calm colours. They're very relaxing colours. They're very kind of positive colours.
Someone who loves structure, I guess, also.
Yeah. And also that up in the top right and the bottom left, you've got that that greenery, that
nature. Yeah.
You know, I'm a big fan of the biophilia hypothesis. This idea that, you know, we're human beings. We're basically animals. Animals should be in natural environments, and there's lots of evidence and research to suggest that when we are placed in, or we bring nature into our homes and into our lives, our well-being does improve. So what about this one? This was about their job and what they'd like to do. I'm going to jump in. I like the rainbows and the hearts. That to me is kind of really optimistic. And if you look at the things that they were looking at, like a psychologist, yoga instructor, nutritionist, researcher, charity worker, scientist, librarian, graphic designer, life coach, writer, it kind of made me think about, you know, the candy floss example, because they're all activities with
a writer
doing things with people, isn't it? Sorry, did you say writer?
Yeah, it's a writer, I guess. Ideal job. Nice, happy in using words to express, to give information.
and able to do it really, really well. Let's see. Okay, this is one. There's a reason why this is one of my favourite ones. So this is the strengths. So what we did is we looked at the strengths, the 4 top strengths to basically broaden and build on. And then what we did is we said, okay, let's pick up some other strengths that fell a little bit lower down, and how we're going to build those into your life. I would just jump in here and say, I don't know if I was being too much of a psychologist, but I just noticed, and I really liked that leadership, we had this thing, pigs might fly, which in the UK is an expression for something that's very unlikely or impossible. So that was a really joyous moment between us both, where we kind of talked about that. And, you know, I was assured it was just a coincidence. It was, you know, there was nothing unconscious or subconscious in that one, but it did make me smile. What about this one here about these strengths? One of the things is, I mean, I guess it's slightly easier for me, but I think the bravery in tackling the addiction was actually a real strength, because it takes a lot of courage to put the effort in and to focus towards your well-being and recovery. So, I mean, I wanted to share those because I just think they're absolutely beautiful. And I'm, you know, so pleased that somebody was able to get these strengths and have that creativity to create something that, you know, they're all in a journal so that they can be kept. So there's kind of like a historic record of them. Okay, so the outcome of that is a college course was completed. They found employment in an area of strength, very much forward-looking, very much happier, improved interpersonal relationships. At the time of writing this, they were absent for 314 days and still going, which I just think is an absolutely amazing achievement. A number of proud moments, and much more assertive and future orientated. And I first started working with this person during lockdown, so it was all over the phone and virtual. And towards the end, we've been able to meet, and just to see this person flourish in front of my eyes is absolutely amazing. And sometimes it feels it's not the same person who I met all those months ago. Just one of the things, you know, so these are what they call maladaptive schema, and I really don't like the term maladaptive schema, but these are the unhelpful schema. So emotional deprivation, abandonment, mistrust. And what we found is when they were first measured, they were all very high or high. And when they were measured again, they had all pretty much, well, they had all reduced, and those that stayed in the same category, even though they still fell in that high cutoff point, they were significantly or noticeably lower. And I kind of felt that's just worth sharing, because some of these things are, you know, if you imagine that the subjugation schema or the self-sacrifice schema, that's, you know, putting other people before your own needs, focusing on other people. Emotional inhibition is another really good one, because that's not being willing to identify, share, and express your emotions. So for somebody to be very emotionally inhibited, and I guess maybe to use a substance to contain it, to being less emotionally inhibited and being able to safely express their emotions. So that's the end of the presentation. What I do want to do is I just want to give my very special thanks to BP for allowing me to use their vision boards. What I'd also like to say is how grateful I am that she allowed me to accompany on her journey of recovery. I was, you know, often very humbled by her effort and her achievements. And I think, I'm sure many of us experience this when we work with people. Sometimes we learn so much more about ourselves than we ever thought. And this certainly is a case where I learned so much about myself and about people by working with this individual. I kind of feel that also they gave me the opportunity to flourish and grow a bit as well. So I am really appreciative and grateful of that. And that is my presentation. I'm not sure what I do now. Do I just shop?
If you can, yeah, if you shut down the PowerPoint, then we'll